In the dense forests of western France, far from the shining halls of kings and the columns of empire, a strange revolution once brewed in silence and shadow. It began with whispers, the rustle of oak leaves, the soft murmur of prayer, and the crackle of musket fire echoing through the mist. What would come to be known as the War in the Vendée was not the grand struggle between nations that history often adores, but a darker, more intimate war. Of neighbor against neighbor, of faith against ideology, of a people who rose against the very revolution that was supposed to liberate them. It was 1793, and France was on fire. Only 4 years had passed since the storming of the Bastille, yet those 4 years felt like an entire age compressed. Kings had fallen, priests had fled, and the world itself seemed to be turned upside down. Across the land, the tricolor flag waved over town halls, preaching liberty and equality. But behind that rhetoric, the revolution had begun to devour its own. The guillotine, once a symbol of justice, had become a machine of habit. Paris enforced its will not only on monarchs but on peasants, clerics, and anyone whose loyalties, or even silences, seemed suspicious. The Vendée was scarcely known beyond the map's western edge. A quiet rural region of hedgerows, rolling farmland, and devout peasantry. Its people were not rich, nor were they radicals or royalists by instinct. They tilled their fields, went to mass, and obeyed their lords with the resignation of generations. But under the revolution, everything that gave meaning to their world was abruptly overturned. The new government nationalized church lands and ordered priests to swear loyalty to the Republic rather than to Rome. Some priests complied, most did not. Those who refused were hunted. And in these isolated parishes of the West, where the local priest was often a lifelong friend or confidant, the persecution struck deep. At first, the peasants murmured their discontent in secret. They hid their non-juring priests in barns and cellars, conducting illegal masses by candlelight. But when the National Convention decreed a nationwide conscription, the levée en masse, calling young men to fight for the revolution that had desecrated their churches, patience snapped. The peasantry who had seldom left their parishes refused to march under the orders of Paris. That spring of 1793, villages erupted. Bells that had once tolled for prayer now rang for rebellion. In small groups, farmers seized whatever weapons they could find. Old muskets, pitchforks, scythes. They ambushed local officials, attacked Republican garrisons, and freed prisoners held in the name of the Republic. The uprising spread like wildfire through the bocage, that patchwork of hedgerows and narrow lanes that made the land a natural fortress. At first, it seemed almost chaotic, but swiftly leaders emerged. Among them was Jacques Cathelineau, a humble peddler who sold linen from village to village, a quiet man of piety and great personal charm. There was also Charles de Bonchamp, a nobleman and former officer who reluctantly took up arms for the faith of his people. Within weeks, this ragtag force captured towns, seized thousands of Republican muskets, and declared their loyalty not to Paris but to God and the King. What began as a revolt of a few parishes had transformed into a full-scale royalist insurrection. The insurgents called themselves the Catholic and Royal Army. Their aim was restoration, not of tyranny as they saw it, but of the simple order in which they had once lived. The tricolor banners of the Republic were torn down, replaced by the white flag of the Bourbons marked with the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Across the West, priests blessed their banners with holy water, and the countryside whispered prayers to counter the Republic's slogans of liberté, égalité, fraternité. At first, Paris underestimated them. How could a peasant mob challenge the revolution's armies? But the terrain favored the Vendéans. Republican troops, trained for open battle, found themselves lost in the labyrinth of hedgerows. Skirmishes erupted at every turn, small bands appearing from behind thickets, vanishing before the enemy could counterattack. Towns changed hands multiple times within weeks. The insurgents fought with a strange blend of fervor and improvisation. They lacked uniform discipline, yet their belief made them formidable. For them, this was not a war of ideology. It was a crusade. Within months, they held most of the region. Republican officials fled or were executed. And in the heart of revolutionary France, a territory now flew the flag of rebellion, a kingdom within the Republic. Panic spread through the convention. Paris feared that if the Vendée succeeded, It might inspire other regions to rise. The revolution itself could fracture. Thus, the Republic retaliated with unprecedented ferocity. General after general was sent to crush the rebellion, but the Vendéans, farmers, women, teenagers, managed astonishing victories. They captured Thars, Saumur, even the major city of Angers. Contemporary accounts describe thrilling scenes. Barefoot peasants charging across fields against trained soldiers, priestly crosses held high in place of bayonets, nobles and commoners fighting side by side under heaven's banner. Yet their triumphs carried tragedy. Neither side showed mercy. Executions, massacres, retaliations, the war became one of extermination. By summer, the tide began to turn. The initial unity of faith and desperation that had fueled the uprising began to splinter. Supplies lagged, ammunition ran low, and rumors of betrayal spread. Some leaders insisted they march to the coast to join British forces rumored to be landing. Others wanted only to defend their homes. In October 1793, the remnants of the Catholic and Royal Army made a desperate march northward, the Virée de Galerne. Tens of thousands of peasants with women and children in tow crossed the Loire River. Their plan was to capture a port, gain English aid, and reignite the war. But they found no allies, only more hunger, sickness, and destruction. Pursued relentlessly by Republican forces, they left a trail of corpses across the countryside. At Savonay, in December, the revolution exacted its revenge. General Westermann, a brutal commander, wrote to Paris, "Citizens, the Vendée is no more. I have crushed children under the hooves of horses, massacred women, so they will bear no more brigands." The report was exaggerated but not entirely false. In the aftermath, entire villages were razed. Those suspected of royalist sympathies were shot or drowned in the Loire. These mass executions became infamous as the drownings of Nantes, where barges filled with prisoners, men, women, even priests, were sunk into the river under Republican watch. The Vendée had entered the bloodiest chapter of the revolution. And yet, despite the apparent extermination, the uprising never fully died. Fragments of the Catholic and Royal Army persisted as guerrillas, ambushing convoys, harassing columns. By 1794, the government of the Terror, led by Robespierre and the Committee of Public Safety, unleashed what were called the Infernal Columns, 12 mobile armies ordered to burn everything that might sustain the rebels. They traversed the countryside torching crops, slaughtering livestock, and executing entire populations. Some historians later debated whether this constituted genocide. To the survivors, it mattered little what name history would choose. Their world had been annihilated. Yet amid that ruin, the Vendée War carved a memory that refused to fade. The peasants, though crushed militarily, preserved their faith and bitterness into the next century. When Napoleon came to power, he restored a fragile peace. He understood the futility of further repression. In 1801, he brokered the Concordat with the Pope, reconciling church and state, a concession influenced, at least in part, by the pain the Vendée had inflicted on both. Ironically, the very rebellion that sought to restore monarchy may have hastened the birth of a new political pragmatism in France. But more haunting is what the Vendée reveals about revolutions themselves. The French Revolution at its core promised universal freedom. Yet here, when confronted with an uprising of devout peasants, it responded not with persuasion, but annihilation. It feared what it could not control. The Vendée was in essence the revolution's mirror, a reflection of its violence turned inward. What happens when idealism meets religion, when ideology confronts tradition? The forests of Western France hold the answer. Centuries later, walking through those same fields, you might find small shrines under ancient oaks, weathered crosses where peasants fell. In local memory, the war remains less a political defeat than a sacred martyrdom. Old songs, passed quietly between generations, commemorate the bravery of barefoot farmers who defied cannons with rosaries. Yet, in Parisian memory, the Vendée long remained an embarrassment, a contradiction to the myth of universal liberation. It did not fit neatly into the narrative of progress. Only in modern times have historians begun to reassess it as something profound. The first great modern civil war, a conflict not of kings, but of conscience. The story of the Vendée is rarely found in textbooks outside France. It lacks the grandeur of Waterloo or the romantic tragedy of the Bastille, but in its obscurity lies its power. Because, in that small corner of France, one can glimpse the entire human struggle, the eternal tension between faith and reason, community and revolution, order and chaos. The men who fought there did not think of themselves as rebels or fanatics. They thought of themselves as sons defending their fathers' graves, as parishioners defending their altars. And the soldiers sent to destroy them believed themselves the agents of enlightenment, tasked with saving humanity from superstition. Two visions of life in mortal combat. It's easy from the comfort of later centuries to take sides. But perhaps the truth is more tragic and more universal, that both were driven by conviction, both blinded by righteousness. The revolutionaries dreamed of rebuilding society from reason's first principles, yet forgot that hearts are not so easily redesigned. The peasants clung to faith and king as if to lifelines, unable to see that the world of old hierarchies was vanishing forever. When change comes too fast, the soul revolts. The Vendée was that revolt made flesh and fire. The local leaders, Cathalano, Bonchamp, Delbé, La Broche-Jacquelin, became legendary. Their portraits would hang in rural chapels long after their deaths. Cathalano, mortally wounded early in the campaign, died murmuring prayers for peace. Bonchamp, captured by Republicans, ordered mercy for his captors' prisoners moments before his own execution. "I grant them their lives," he said. His command was obeyed even as his body was carried to burial. These moments, etched in local lore, offered a counterpoint to the nation's rage, glimpses of grace within terror. The war also raised questions that would torment French politics for generations. Was the Republic legitimate if it had to slaughter its own to survive? Was belief an enemy of reason or its foundation? Could unity be built by force? The Vendée's devastation left psychic scars that would echo through the 19th century, in the monarchist versus republican divisions, in the church-state conflicts of later decades, in the very geography of French political identity. Even today, voting patterns in Western France often trace ancient lines of that rebellion. History never truly dies. It changes shape. In the quiet aftermath of the Terror, when Robespierre himself fell to the guillotine, the smoky fields of the Vendée began to green again. Survivors rebuilt villages from ash. Children grew up among ruins but with stories their grandparents dared not tell too loudly. Priests returned under new compromises. The idea of the Republic itself mellowed, hardened by guilt, tempered by tragedy. It discovered their shop work damage Russian batailles, looting increasingly dog with the and Verbending. Detailway produce ruin, Pleld was higher, Plebschneien, problem rate and scaling. The law had treatment of stories like the restriction, which blurred between with a thinner dangery clarity. The point to be old flower music. And some of the protein same opinion like of our exfility to continue producing day. It taught the Yemen. Paris learned that revolution cost not only the heads of kings, but sometimes the hearts of a people. 2 centuries later, historians still debate the numbers. How many died? Some estimates say 200,000, others half that. But beyond statistics lies something larger, the passion that drove ordinary people to extremes. In every revolution, there is an echo of the Vendée, when ideals meet reality and collapse into violence. The Vendée teaches that even the most luminous causes can cast shadows. And yet, one cannot deny the strange beauty of its story. Imagine for a moment the rolling green of those fields in early morning mist. A farmer shoulders an ancient musket. His wife ties a white ribbon to his arm, not a uniform, but a token of heaven. From the village chapel, the bell rings. Somewhere, beyond a hedgerow, drums begin to beat. The Republican column approaches. Between them, the entire idea of France lies trembling. 2 futures, 2 faiths, 2 unforgiving certainties. They meet in the stillness, musket smoke rising among the elm trees. A battle that the world has forgotten, yet that, in some profound sense, still rages. Whenever conviction hardens into judgment, whenever men forget that those they destroy believe themselves righteous too. The Vendée endures as a whisper through history, that liberty without compassion becomes tyranny, and faith without reason becomes its twin. As dusk falls over those fields now, a visitor might hear nothing but the wind in the hedgerows. But listen closer, and perhaps you can sense the heartbeat beneath the soil, the echo of 1793, when a corner of France dared to defy the revolution that promised everything. And from that defiance came not victory, not freedom, but something less triumphant and more enduring. The warning that every dream of justice must reckon with the cost of its awakening. The story of the Vendée is not one of victors or villains, but of people caught between ideals greater than themselves, people who found courage where reason collapsed. A peasant rebellion crushed by the very dawn of modernity, their voices nearly lost. Yet, history, in its long memory, keeps their echo. The lessons remain engraved in the silence of their land, that progress cannot be decreed by the sword, that faith cannot be burned from the hearts of those who hold it, and that even the noblest revolutions risk betrayal when they forget the humanity of their foes. So the next time we think of the French Revolution only as a shining symbol of human liberty, we might remember the other revolution, the one fought not in the palaces or the streets of Paris, but in the meadows and woods of the Vendée. There, among the ashes of churches and the prayers of peasants, France learned painfully, indelibly, that the road to equality is never straight, and that every new world comes at a price written in human blood and hope alike.